Okay, so let's get back to Hanifin then. You spoke about Tanev and a lot of interest. Will anyone pay Connie's price now, or does he have to wait and squeeze? Hanifin feels different because I think the age makes him less of a rental and more of an extension candidate. Is that why this is more complicated?
No, I think it's more complicated for a number of reasons in that, one, the acquisition cost is going to be pretty significant. Two, you're looking at, although really impactful, in some ways likely a pure rental, because I think the Hanifin camp is already kind of impacting this process in the sense that teams that have been in the mix on Hanifin believe that he's indicated either to the Flames or elsewhere that at some point, whether it's now or this summer, his preferred destination is the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Ooh.
Now, what does that mean moving forward? I mean, that part is harder to handicap, but think back to what we were just talking about. Of the teams that are in the market to really improve their defense that could use help on the left side, how many, if that is fact, which we shouldn't treat it as gospel, but if that is along the lines of what he is thinking, how many teams are going to be willing to pony up significant assets for someone that you have potentially little chance to re-sign? And we also don't know that feeling is totally mutual either. We don't know what the Tampa Bay Lightning are thinking. Would they pony up for a big contract for Hanifin this summer? I can't see them being a team that has the assets right now to pull off a deal like that. But I think certainly something to monitor and watch, because I think that's the toughest part that Craig Conroy is dealing with right now. Is this is someone who should bring you a massive return. I've talked for weeks about the Hampus Lindholm trade between the Ducks and the Bruins and how that is the perfect trade comp. Mm-hmm. But if there's only potentially a couple teams involved, or maybe even one as a preferred destination, how tough will that be to pull off and get that significant return? I feel like he's swimming upstream already.
And that's interesting because I think Hanifin has a 10-team no-trade list, so he certainly has some say. And if teams want to talk extension, his camp has a lot of say. But you could trade him to Detroit or Toronto or Boston tomorrow if need be. It's just that other teams seem to be thinking that he's going to be tough to ink. That's what you're suggesting?
Yeah, and by the way, I think we can formally rule out the Toronto Maple Leafs as a team that's in on Hanifin.
Okay.
So cross another one off the list. So, you're talking Tampa, and these are the teams that I could come up with based on the market and where things are at. Tampa, the Islanders, which I always put them in only God and Lou know category. The Devils, who just had Severson and let him walk, and Hanifin is a very, comparable stylistic and statistical fit.
Okay.
The Wings, as you mentioned. And then a wild card would be the Golden Knights, in that they've been very aggressive in the past, and they're a team that will have some real cap space and a need to replace Alec Martinez on the left side of their blue line. Those two guys are different stylistic players, but they're going to have an opening. Would they jump in? Outside of that, I mean, you tell me, like, you find another team for me that's in the mix.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because Tanev's the right shot, he's the left. If you flip Tanev's grip the other way, I think the list changes a bit because right shot D are so rare, but it is a very different
really
type of
different
list than
and
Tanev, isn't it?
Market. It becomes, and then compare the asset cost of totally different players, but compare the Tanev price to what Hanifin should, in a perfect world, a true free market, what would he go for? They're totally different, but that's not the cards that the Flames are have right now to play.
Okay, so let's say Tampa is interested, and again, we're based this on what may or may not be true, that's a preferred destination for Hanifin. Tampa may or may not like Noah Hanifin at all, but they are missing Mikhail Sergachev, who looks like he's going to be out a long, long time. I would suggest likely for the season, certainly the regular season. and deep into the playoffs. They could use a D. They're also kind of just in that wild card range. They're not in the top 3 of Florida, Boston, Toronto, and the Atlantic. They still have that core of stars with Point, Kucherov, Stamkos, Hedman, and Vasilevsky. It's still their window, so to speak. But the challenge for Connie would be they don't have a first until 2026.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Even if they wanted to, which I think they do, and even if they have the cap space, which I know they do, and even if they have the need and want to re-sign him, which I think they do, where are you gonna get these assets from on the return? Does a 2026 first round pick help the Flames?
Not probably till 2028, 2029, right? And
At
who
the
knows?
earliest.
Maybe Tampa's bad then, and that's a really high pick. But boy, that's way down the road.
Well, then you'd have to convince Julian Brisebois to not lottery protect it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's another hurdle. I think in a lot of ways they line up as sort of perfect trade partners, but it's the facts, the assets. It's not the feelings or the emotions. It's the assets that need to get it done. And unless there's someone on the Lightning roster that the Flames are really excited about, that changes the complexion of this, someone that has term that they could get back for a rental to get really creative. I'm just not seeing it.
I don't see a young player there either that's really, really sexy. I mean, they're not going to trade their core veterans.
Brandon Hagel would be perfect, but they ain't trading him.
No, they just re-upped him and they got him locked in.
They just re-upped him and he had 30
on
and 30 last year and is on track for a 70+ point season.
Yeah, so that's a guy they want to win with now. They're not 100%. Shedding him. And so you would have to have a prospect in the system so good that that plus a 2026 first maybe moves the needle. But I don't know that they do. I would suggest they haven't had a lot of first round selections.
No, Isaac Howard is pretty good, and he's been really interesting transferring from Minnesota Duluth to Michigan State, and he was a force at World Junior, but it would have to be a pretty special deal, I think, in order to pull something like that off. And would they even be willing to trade Isaac Howard? And
would the kid want to sign in Calgary because he's a collegiate kid? He'd have rights to, you could say, I might just stay till free agency. That is tricky. So basically, how does this work for Connie then? If he feels like this market is difficult with this Tampa wrinkle that you've introduced to us today?
Your guess is as good as mine. How does he navigate that? I think basically what you have to do ultimately is reduce your asking price and try and involve as many teams as you can on a pure rental basis.
Yeah. Huh. And I guess if you're a winning team that says, man, we're a piece away, I just would have a tough time him going to Vegas and having a good run and not wanting to stay there. Who hasn't wanted to stay in Vegas? Teams will believe in their culture. If we can win, we can keep this guy. So maybe that's the pitch that Connie has. Bring him in, let him see what you got cooking, and he won't want to leave.
I mean, that's what most teams would typically try to do if there wasn't already some of this info or intel floating out there already about Tampa.
What does that make you think of, Rhett, when you hear Tampa there? That's new.
It sounds like it pisses me off because it's not tampering.
Sounds like tampering.
Yeah, but it's part of, I'm sure, the happens all the time, but when Frankie talks about it, he obviously realized this is an asset that everybody wants, but the deal is difficult. The deal to get the assets in return and the right return is a lot more difficult because Hanifin has said, I'm going to go where I want to go at the end of this contract. I'm giving myself the opportunity to choose.
But he's earned that right, has he not?
Totally. Absolutely. I'm not mad at him. I'm saying that that's what we always think that these things can be huge returns, but if a player starts to put his rights, what he's earned, and again, it's not holding it against him, it makes a difference for the team trying to deal him. If he's a guy, if he's from, I can tell you right now, if he's from Yellowknife and he just wants to play in the NHL, you're not hearing that.
Yeah. The other thing I think about, guys, sorry to interrupt, Rhett, when Claude Giroux moved from Philly to Florida, all we heard was that, he'd really handcuff the process and man, the return's not going to be great. Well, a first rounder and Owen Tippett later, I think Philly's okay with that deal for a rental.
Yeah, but I was just going to add in, because I was thinking about the Giroux trade as we started diving into this, and I was like, but that's different because he held all the cards. He had a full no move, no trade, and it was never really designed to be anything more than a rental. I don't think he was ever going into it thinking that it was going to be Florida, because everyone knew in the back of his mind, he's from Northern Ontario and Hearst, but he had lived since he was a teenager in Ottawa, that Ottawa was going to be the place that he would end up eventually. So there were no sort of, everyone went in eyes wide open, so to speak, about what would play out after that. And the Flyers did pretty darn well, all things considered, at a time in which Chuck Fletcher was roasted for that trade. Owen Tippett has just signed a new $50 million deal, and he looks like the real deal in a 30-goal scorer potentially that flies, has some speed. He's the fastest clock speed in the NHL this year, according to puck and player tracking. So I'm not saying the Flames are up a creek. I'm just saying it's different this time around, because a lot of the teams that want to be in the mix, that would love to get their hands on Hanifin, just don't have the picks, the assets to pull it off. It's not that they don't want to be. It's just that the market, I think, in terms of where you can send him, these teams have already spent all their assets on other stuff previously.
Sorry, Rhett. Anything else you want there?
No, I don't want to say anything else. I'm just annoyed. I want everything. Come on, let's go.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point, Frank. Like, it doesn't mean they won't get a haul. It just means it's going to be difficult to navigate. And maybe at the finish line, it's all great. But boy, that was a lot of work. But it certainly doesn't seem as cut and dried as a Tanev swap.
No, and it's not. And guess what? Like, maybe we should have had an inkling of this potentiality back in the summer when he wasn't traded. That we all kind of wondered, okay, well, he was obviously available. Not to say that the Flames were not comfortable heading into this year with him, and not to say that, what part of the reason that they probably attempted to sign him and keep him was maybe that they had a sense that this was coming, that there just wasn't quite a market there. Not everything is easy, and not, even though he is the perfect comparable on so many levels to Hampus Lindholm, just because one team is able to make that happen doesn't mean that the same thing is going to be available to you. And I guess the way to explain all that is just to essentially temper expectations. Not saying it's going to be bad. It's just that this isn't going to be easy.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to check out more of our content right here on the Flames Nation YouTube page. We had a bunch of great long form interviews. You can check out some videos we've done as well outside of the studio. And of course, if you want more writing or merchandise stuff, flamesnation.ca or nationgear.ca. Appreciate you watching.